Please don't go. I remember whispering, my throat tight and raw, as I ran after him. My plea was swallowed by the noise of the station. He didn't turn. His arm tightened around the woman at his side, the woman who had replaced my mother, and he kissed her like I was nothing more than an interruption. Her children trailed behind them, clutching snacks and smiling. I stood frozen in the crowd, 14 years old, a ragged backpack on my shoulders, 20 crumpled dollars in my pocket, and no one left to call family. I waited on that hard bench for 6 endless hours, praying he would come back, convincing myself there had been a mistake. Each passing minute burned deeper into me until finally my phone buzzed with photo notification. There he was, smiling at a resort, glass raised in celebration. The caption under the picture said, "Making memories with the ones who matter most." The words gutted me. That was the moment I knew I wasn't part of his most. I was nothing. That was the night I stopped being a daughter and my story began. But to explain how I ended up abandoned in the middle of a crowded station, you have to go back to that morning. I still believe somehow that my father cared about me. I sat in his car, the November sky pressing down outside, the air between us thick with silence. He hadn't spoken once since picking me up from my mother's run-down apartment. I hugged my backpack to my knees, trying not to let the unease twist too deep into my stomach. Maybe this was a trip, I told myself. Maybe he wanted father-daughter time, the kind we hadn't had since his new wife came into the picture. But something in the set of his jaw told me the truth was going to be far crueler. The car smelled different than I remembered, not like coffee and oil from his late nights at the garage, but sharp, expensive cologne that didn't belong to the man who used to cheer the loudest at my debate competitions. I shifted in the seat, watching rain trace streaks down the window, and finally asked the question clawing at me. Are we coming back before Monday? I have that presentation I told you about. My voice cracked with hope. His hands tightened on the wheel. You'll figure it out, Lila. He said my name without looking at me. Voice flat, clipped, a dismissal more than an answer. It cut. This wasn't the man who stayed up with me gluing planets on a cardboard solar system in 3rd grade. That man had vanished 6 months earlier, the day he married Serena. Everything had changed after that. His clothes, his scent, his eyes, which now slid over me as if I were a responsibility he couldn't wait to set down. Thanksgiving replayed in my mind. Serena wrinkling her nose at my old jacket and whispering just loud enough, "She looks like she belongs on the street." He hadn't offended me. He had laughed awkwardly, like agreeing with her was easier than standing up for me. I pressed my forehead to the glass, trying to ignore the dread curling in my chest. Serena's daughter already called him Dad, and her son trailed after him like a shadow, soaking up all the attention that used to be mine. As the streets grew unfamiliar, my grip on the backpack tightened. Each turn of the tires carried me further from the home I thought I had, closer to something I couldn't name yet. When the tall clock tower of the station appeared, its shadow looming over us, I knew deep down, this wasn't a trip. This was an ending. He pulled into the drop-off lane, not the parking lot. That detail hit harder than any words. My hands trembled against the straps of my backpack. "Dad!" My voice wavered. "What are we doing here?" He didn't answer. He popped the trunk, his movement sharp, impatient, like he couldn't wait to be rid of me. I swallowed hard, telling myself this couldn't be what it looked like, but a small voice whispered that it was, and had been for months. I remembered the dinner at Serena's house after their engagement, her long, polished table, her daughter twirling in a designer dress. Serena had leaned toward me, smiling sweetly, venom hidden in her tone. "Do you have any clothes that actually fit, darling?" My father's laugh hadn't been nervous. It had been complicit. That night, I stared at my plate wishing I could vanish. There had been so many moments like that. The fridge covered in Serena's children's drawings while mine were thrown away. The laughter drifting up the stairs at night that always died when I appeared in the doorway. The way my father let Serena's words cut me again and again. So he shoved my backpack into my hands at the station, his jaw tight, his eyes darting toward the entrance where Serena and her children stood waiting. I understood. This wasn't just neglect. This was deliberate. They had come to watch me disappear. "You're old enough to figure things out," he muttered, not even meeting my eyes. My chest burned with questions. Figure what out? Where do I go? Why am I not enough? But the words stuck like stones in my throat. His silence was the only answer I would get. The November air cut across my face as I stepped out of the car. He pulled my backpack in the trunk like he was unloading garbage. My hands shook as I clutched the straps of my jacket. "Dad," I whispered, voice breaking, "aren't you coming inside with me?" He didn't answer. His gaze flicked past me to the glass doors. I followed it and froze. Serena stood there in her perfect coat, her daughter clutching her hand, her son scrolling on his phone. Serena's eyes locked with mine, and for a moment her lips curved into a smile. Sharp, triumphant. I said his name louder, panic clawing at my chest. "You haven't given me a ticket. Or money. Where am I supposed to go?" He still didn't look at me. He walked toward them instead, his shoulders finally relaxing as Serena slid her arm around his waist. He kissed her cheek, ruffled her son's hair, the same gesture he used to give me, and I broke. "Dad." The word ripped out of me raw and desperate. Heads turned. Strangers glanced my way. An old woman frowned with concern, but the only man I needed didn't even pause. Together, they walked toward the exit, a picture of a perfect family, while I stood alone with a backpack that suddenly felt heavier than I could carry. For a fleeting moment, I convinced myself he'd turn around, that this was a test. Any second he'd laugh and say, "Come on, Lila, let's go." But then the glass door shut behind them, sealing my erasure. The station pulsed with life. Families hugging, couples kissing, children squealing, but none of it touched me. I sank onto a cold bench, my backpack on my lap, and stared at the $20 bill in my pocket, like it might solve something. I waited. I checked the clock again and again. I told myself he would come back once the guilt caught up to him. I imagined him rushing through the doors, pulling me into his arms. I'm sorry I made a mistake, but as the hours dragged by, the truth pressed harder against my ribs. Each tick of the clock carved hope out of me. He wasn't coming back. At one point, I watched the boy climb into his father's lap on the bench across from me. His father kissed the top of his head and whispered something that made the boy laugh. The sound stabbed me. That used to be me. That used to be my dad. By evening, hunger gnawed at me, but nothing compared to the ache hollowing out my chest. When I opened my phone for distraction, I found the final blow. A photo of my father at a resort, glass raised beside Serena and her children, captioned, "Making memories with the ones who matter most." The words burned. They were proof written for the world to see. Proof that I had been replaced. Proof that the girl sitting alone on that bench no longer existed in his story. By the time the clock struck 9, the station had emptied. Families gone home, laughter fading, the sterile hum of overhead lights the only company left. I was still on that same bench, arms wrapped around my backpack, stomach growling, tears dried stiff on my sleeves. That was when a voice broke through. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" I looked up. An older woman stood a few feet away, scarf knotted at her throat, grocery bag in hand. Her eyes softened when she saw my red face. "My dad, he left me," I whispered, the words spilling out like blood from a wound. Her lips pressed tight, a sigh slipping free. No child should ever be left alone like this. She sat carefully beside me. "Do you have anyone you can call?" The word family twisted in my chest. My mother had long since drowned herself in drinking. My father had erased me. Serena had made it clear I didn't belong. For a moment, I thought I had no one. Then a name surfaced, one I hadn't dared speak in months. My grandmother, Eleanor Blackwell. My father had forbidden me from seeing her after the divorce, calling her meddlesome. But her number was etched into my memory like a lifeline. With trembling hands, I dialed. The phone rang once, twice, then, "Hello." Her voice, warm and steady. "Grandma, it's me. It's Lila." A sharp intake of breath. "Lila, my sweet girl. What's wrong? Where are you?" "Dad dropped me at the station. He's gone." My voice cracked. "I don't know what to do." Her reply was fierce, unyielding. "None of this is your fault." Stay right there. I'm coming for you. 90 minutes later, headlights swept across the station. My grandmother's sleek sedan rolled to a stop, and before I could stand, she was there, wrapping me in her arms. Lavender and old books clung to her, and for the first time all day, I could breathe. "You're safe now," she whispered, as we drove away. I pressed my forehead at the window, the city lights giving way to winding roads lined with oaks. When the car turned onto a cobblestone driveway that stretched into darkness, I sat up straight. At the end stood a sprawling estate. Stone walls lit by lanterns, windows glowing warm against the night. It looked like something out of another world, timeless, immovable, powerful. "This is your house?" I asked, voice small. "Our house," she corrected gently. "The Blackwell estate." Inside, marble floors gleamed under chandeliers. Portraits of stern men and elegant women lined the walls, their painted eyes following me. I felt like an intruder in sneakers and a thrift store jacket. Why didn't I know about any of this? I whispered. Her gaze was steady, sad. "Because your father didn't want you to." And then the truth unraveled. My grandfather had built a vast fortune. My father had burned through his share recklessly, but $12 million had been set aside in trust for me. Money I wouldn't touch until I turned 18, or until my guardianship was contested. My father knew, and his cruelty had never been about indifference. It had been about control, about money. My stomach turned as my grandmother laid out the truth. "He left you there, Lila, because if he can convince the court you're unstable, he can take control of your trust. Abandonment was a strategy. He wanted to break you." I sat frozen, bile rising in my throat. The man who once tucked me in at night hadn't just forgotten me. He had calculated my pain. Tears slipped to my fingers as I whispered. "I thought he didn't want me, but it's worse. He only wanted what I had." My grandmother's voice was steady, fierce. "He may see money, but I see you, and we're going to fight." In the days that followed, she showed me the documents he'd forged, credit cards in my name, debts I'd never created. Each paper was another betrayal, proof that he hadn't only abandoned me. He had stolen pieces of my future to fund his greed. Then came the final blow. My mother, the one person I still secretly hoped for, agreed to testify against me in exchange for a cut of my inheritance. My chest cracked under the weight of it. Both my parents had chosen money over me. That night, I lay awake in a bed too grand for my grief, staring at the ceiling. The silk sheets couldn't hide the truth. I was no longer fighting for love. I was fighting for survival. This wasn't family anymore. This was war. My grandmother moved quickly. Therapy sessions with Dr. Carter, a warm-eyed woman who asked me the questions I had never been allowed to answer. "What do you want to say that you've never been allowed to say?" The words spilled out. Serena's insults. The nights I stood at the top of the stairs, desperate for laughter that vanished when I appeared. The 6 hours alone on that bench. The shame that gnawed at me. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe if I were better, he wouldn't have left. Dr. Carter shook her head gently. "His choices are not your fault. You can't force someone to love you who chooses not to, but you can choose yourself." Her words cut through me like light through fog. My grandmother didn't stop there. She hired a tutor to catch me up on schoolwork. She brought in a mentor, Mrs. Turner, who taught me to stand tall, to speak without shrinking, to hold my voice steady even when the world tried to erase me. At first, my voice cracked every time I practiced. My hands shook. But little by little, I changed. Each time I looked into the mirror, I saw less of the abandoned girl at the station and more of someone who might fight back.
Outside, the world was already watching. A grainy video from the station had leaked. Me clutching my backpack, begging him not to leave, collapsing on that bench. Millions saw it. Headlines screamed. "Teen abandoned by father and stepfamily at train station." Strangers flooded my messages. "Stay strong, you're not alone." Survivors of neglect shared their stories, binding their pain to mine. For the first time, I felt less invisible. But with support came cruelty. Trolls called me spoiled. My father's allies spread lies online. That I was unstable, that the video was misleading, that I had run away on purpose. Serena's friends posted glossy photos of their perfect family, mocking me without using my name. The weight of it crushed me until I broke down one night. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am the problem. My grandmother's voice cut sharp as steel. The truth doesn't need everyone to believe it, Lila. It only needs you. The next day I stood before a camera for the first time. My voice trembled at first, but then I remembered that broken girl on the bench. I owed her my strength. What you saw in that video is real. My father left me. But I will not be erased. When the clip aired, support surged again. The battle lines were drawn. Half the world saw me as a symbol of resilience. The other half painted me as a liar. But this time the pain didn't silence me. It fueled me. My father had chosen to destroy me for money. I chose to fight back for something far greater. Myself. My grandmother warned me that the louder the truth becomes, the more desperate lies grow to drown it out. I didn't understand what she meant until the morning my father's face filled every television in the Blackwell sitting room. He sat beneath studio lights in a navy suit that made him look gentle, dignified. Nothing like the man who had watched me disappear through glass doors. His hands were folded, his voice low and careful, and the anchor nodded as if pain lived right behind his eyes. "I love my daughter," he said, and the way he shaped the word love made my stomach twist. "But Lila has been troubled. She's being manipulated by people who never liked me. That video doesn't show the full story." He sighed, a practiced tremor. "I would never abandon her. I was giving her space. Anyone who is a parent understands." The anchor made sympathetic noises. The Chiron read, "Father speaks. I won't give up on her." I stood behind the sofa with my arms wrapped tight across my chest. Something cold slid down my spine, fury, grief, a helpless kind of vertigo, as he turned every wound into a performance. He even talked about debt, calling it a mix-up with clerks. The anchor smiled, the camera softened his edges. Comments mushroomed online within minutes. Some people swallowed it whole. "He looks sincere. Poor man." Others fought for me. "Sincere men don't walk away on camera." But doubt is sticky. It clings even when you know better. "Turn it off," I whispered, but I didn't move. I needed to hear every contortion of the truth so I could recognize it later when it came dressed in softer clothes. My grandmother rested her palm on my shoulder, steady and warm. "He's staging an opening act," she said. "But the stage isn't the courtroom." That night I lay awake, the blue afterglow of screens still humming in my head. In the dark, I mouthed the words Dr. Carter had pressed into me like a key. "I don't have to convince everyone. I have to hold to what is real." I closed my eyes and pictured the bench, my own small shape folded around a backpack, the clock counting out the shape of 6 hours. The truth was not pretty, but it was solid and it belonged to me. The next day Mrs. Turner brought in a tripod and a camera no bigger than a fist. We set it on the edge of a bookcase between leather-bound law books and a brass clock older than my grandmother. "He's telling a story," she said, adjusting the lens. "So will you. But yours won't require acting." She sat across from me and asked plain questions, letting silence make space for answers. The room held the quiet smell of paper and lemon polish. I could hear the radiator tick like a distant metronome. What happened that morning? I told it simply. The car ride. The silence. My question about Monday. His knuckles blanching on the wheel. Serena's silhouette in a doorway of glass. The triumphant curve of her smile. What happened to your body when the doors closed? My legs went heavy, I said. Like the ground wanted to keep me there. Like I'd turn to stone if I didn't move. We kept going brick by brick. The forged cards. The calls he forbade. The way doubt eats at you until even your reflection looks like a lie. When Mrs. Turner asked what I wanted now, the answer surprised me with how quickly it arrived. I want the girl on that bench to know she wasn't weak. She was waiting for a person who didn't exist anymore. I want her to know she wasn't the problem. We didn't edit much. The video went out as it was. No music, no polish, just a teenager in a sweater telling the truth. For hours my phone pulsed like a heartbeat. Messages poured in, not neat or camera ready but raw. I thought it was my fault when my dad left. I believed my stepmother when she said I was nothing. He made me feel real. For every stranger who told me I mattered, there were others throwing stones. Rich girl pity party. Manipulated by the grandmother with a mansion. They didn't know that even a castle can feel like a bunker when you're rebuilding from ashes. That night I folded myself into the window seat and watched snow start to lace the oaks. The house breathed around me. Somewhere my grandmother's steps moved down a corridor. I gripped the cushion until the fabric left ridges in my palm and made myself say the words out loud so they'd live in the air, not just my head. He is lying. I am not. The custody hearing arrived with the smell of old paper and coffee that has been warmed too many times. Courtrooms have their own weather. A pressure that gathers under the lights and makes breaths shallower, thoughts sharper. I wore a navy dress that didn't try to be older than I was. My grandmother's hand brushed mine as if to say, "Here I am here." He sat across from us in a suit the color of storm water. If strangers had been asked to pick a father out of a brochure, they might have chosen him. He looked over once, mouth soft in what could pass for concern. But I knew that mouth. I knew how it tightened when Serena whispered. I knew the words it didn't say when I needed them most. His attorney spoke first. About influence, about teenage volatility, about how grief and social media make intoxicating companions. He gestured to me with a kind of rehearsed gentleness. "This is a child in pain," he said, turning to the judge. "We don't blame her. We want to help her." Help. The word rang false as coin on marble. My lawyer stood. The pages she set on the lectern made a small thunder. She did not tell a story. She showed one. Applications I had never seen with my name printed neat and black. Hotel bills that smelled of salt water and disinterest. A signature that looked like mine if mine had been taught to lie. The judge's face did not change, but his pen paused. Then the grainy station footage bloomed on a screen. I didn't look. Once was enough to know every inch of that floor tile. The way my body folded in on itself like a paper animal caught in rain. Somewhere behind me a woman gasped. When they called me, my knees shook exactly twice. I counted the tremors and lifted my chin. "He didn't forget me," I said. "He didn't get confused." He walked away. There is no misunderstanding that lasts 6 hours. The judge's ruling came like a door unlocking. Custody to my grandmother, immediate. Visitation denied pending review. The gavel sounded, one hard tap, and for a breath I felt the whole world exhale through me. My father's mouth pinched, color draining from his face, but I did not look away. I wanted him to see that I was not the bench, not the backpack, not the silence he left behind. I was the girl who stood up. I wish the story ended with that wooden sound and sunlight breaking in the windows. But men who have practiced power do not surrender it. They bargain with it in public squares. 2 days later he rented a podium and stood in front of a hedge of microphones. Serena fused her expression into something delicate and wounded. Her daughter's mouth was a thin slash. Her son stared at his shoes. "My daughter has been stolen from me," he declared. "This is not justice but manipulation." He lifted a glossy photo of me at 7, sunburned and laughing on his shoulders at the beach. "Does this look like a man who would abandon his child?" The press thrilled at the theater. Their pens scratched. Their cameras clicked. The clip played on repeat while I ate toast that tasted like cardboard. The worst part wasn't the spectacle. It was knowing why he chose it. To lure me into the arena where volume is mistaken for evidence. My ribs felt like fingers were pressing hard on them, trying to leave a bruise. That evening my grandmother closed her office door and laid it out clearly without decoration. "You can stay quiet," she said, "and he will build the world around your silence. Or you can speak. But once you step forward you can't step back." The girl on the bench would have stayed quiet. She would have hoped for mercy and called it love. The girl standing in my grandmother's office had learned the difference. "I'll speak," I said. "In my words. In my house. No makeup on the truth." We invited one journalist whose work my grandmother trusted. She came alone, left her shoes by the door without being asked, and sat on the sofa as if it were a pew. She did not push. She asked. I told her about the car, the doors, the backpack. About the debt that was not mine. About a mother who answered a phone and agreed to help him trade my future for her relief. When the piece aired, it was quiet. No dramatic music, no split screens, no shouted debate. Just time and the shape of a life told without makeup. Within hours the tide turned. The hashtag shifted from justice to belief. And although I knew the internet's loyalty is weather, I felt for the first time a wind at my back rather than my face. If the custody hearing set a boundary, the criminal case traced its map. Fraud. Identity theft. Child abandonment. Reckless endangerment. Words that look heavy even on clean paper. His lawyers tried to peel them away. Motion after motion, phrases like prejudicial coverage, and circumstantial context, but the judge shook his head. We would proceed. Court was colder this time, or maybe I had less skin. Reporters took notes until the bailiff pushed them out. The jury filed in like a row of closed books, spines straight, faces guarded. The prosecution began with numbers. There is a language to theft that is both precise and indecent. Dates and merchant codes, card suffixes and signatures that track a person across hotels and islands while their child studies by lamplight. Each document was a bead added to a grim rosary, and when they strung together, the pattern was unmistakable. Then came the witnesses. Serena walked as if the floor were uncertain. She looked smaller than on television, less lacquered. Under oath, she said the thing that mattered most. He told me it was necessary. Necessary, like my identity were a spare coat to be worn and left at parties. Emails appeared like uninvited guests bearing timestamps and phrases that clanged in the room. Just papers. She won't know, fix it later. His lawyer tried to recast her as vindictive, but the jury's eyes had gone still. Stillness can be the loudest refusal. When they called Milo, the boy who once glanced past me in doorways without seeing, I felt my lungs forget how to work. His voice was high, careful with sorrow. He read from a diary that should never have had to become evidence. The fights, the nights, a sentence I had already memorized in private and now had to hear in public. Dad said Lila will disappear forever. He said she's too much trouble. The words moved through the courtroom like cold water. Some jurors looked down at their hands. One watched my father the way a person watches a storm curl on a radar map, measuring where it will land. By the time the prosecutor rested, the narrative didn't need a narrator. It existed heavy and intact. My father sat very straight, as if posture could hold up a collapsing house. When it was my turn, the Bible felt dry under my palm. I promised to tell the truth. An oath we keep daily, Dr. Carter says, or we abandon piece by piece until there's nothing left worth saving. I told it the same way I had for Mrs. Turner's camera. Not dramatic, not embellished, just a path with stones you could step on without slipping. Her. The low hum of the engine. The way he said my name like it were a task. The glass doors. Serena's smile. The bench that taught me how long an hour can last. The forged cards that taught me how easily a name can be stolen. The phone call where a mother stopped being a mother because a man held out money like a cure. I did not cry. My voice cracked only once on the word daughter. I let it crack. Some truths should not sound smooth. When I stepped down, my legs trembled, but my backbone felt like something had been threaded through it. Wire, light, a promise. The defense tried to sand the edges off everything. I was dramatic. Serena was bitter. Milo misunderstood. Numbers are confusing. Signatures can be forged by computers. A father's love is complicated. The jury listened. Juries always listen. The question is what they choose to hear. Deliberations stretched long enough for the radiator to complete its slow-ticking symphony. My grandmother's hand found mine. She didn't say the things people say, it will be okay. Justice always wins. Instead she whispered, whatever happens, you didn't abandon yourself. When the jury filed back, the air tightened to a thin thread. I counted their steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The forepersons stood. On the count of fraud, guilty. The word struck like metal meeting metal. On the count of identity theft, guilty. Another strike. On the count of child abandonment, guilty. I kept breathing. Ashore resisting waves. On the count of reckless endangerment, guilty. My father's jaw jutted forward. His fist hit the table hard enough that the bailiff took one step closer. The judge's sentencing came later, years stacked into a future I want no part of. But in that moment, all that mattered was the silence that followed the last guilty. It wasn't relief. It was release, the sound a lock makes inside you when it finally gives. The day after sentencing, the house changed temperature. Not warmer exactly, but quieter, like the piano in the music room had been tuned. I woke without dread, crouched on my chest like an animal. Dr. Carter called it the after. The after is not a victory parade, she said, smiling. It's a place where you can hear your own voice again. In the after, life became list. College applications lined the kitchen table in neat piles. Mrs. Turner quizzed me for interviews, not about trauma but about ideas. Tell me your thesis, she'd say, and I'd talk about power and protection and how the law can be both a shield and a weapon. At 17 I changed my last name, writing Blackwell with a hand that didn't wobble. It was not erasure. It was reclamation, the difference between throwing something away and lifting it up from where someone else dropped it. By 18, a thick envelope slid through the mail slot. I sat on the foyer floor, marble cold through my jeans, and read the word congratulations. For a full minute I forgot how to breathe. Yale was not a prize, it was a door. On the other side were rooms I wanted to build for other kids who had been left in stations of all kinds. My trust, once a trap in his hands, became a tool in mine. We formed a foundation with a name that felt like a promise rather than a headline. Second Light. We paid retainers for attorneys in towns that had none. We bought cots and clean socks and notebooks for shelters whose shelves were bare. We taught teenagers how to read credit reports like weather maps and how to say no like a full sentence. Not every day glowed. Some mornings I found an old ache sitting at the foot of the bed, asking to be fed. Some nights the station doors slammed in my dreams and I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth. But the after had room for both ache and motion. It had room for a future that did not hinge on a man's approval or a crowd's applause. Milo wrote to me first, shaky handwriting on lined paper, the kind they sell in packs of 5. I'm sorry it started, and then a flood of words that sounded older than he was. Apologies he didn't owe. Questions he had carried like stones in his pockets. Did I hate him? Did I believe he didn't know what to say back then? Did I remember the way he used to line up toy cars on the baseboard like they were waiting for a race that would never be called? We began with letters because letters give you time to build a spine into your sentences. Then calls, stilted at first, then easier. He told me he sometimes dreamed of a door that wouldn't open and woke with his hands aching. I told him that made 2 of us. Can we go to the station? He asked one Saturday in October, the maples outside the library window already on fire. The request startled me. Then it settled. Yes, I said. We should. We walked through glass doors that smelled like oil and coffee and arrival. Afternoon light slanted across the floor. A woman in a mustard coat lifted a toddler. The child threw his head back and laughed. Milo's fingers brushed mine. Were you really here 6 hours? He asked, his voice barely louder than the announcements. 6 hours and 14 minutes, I said. I counted every time the clock coughed. He nodded and kept his eyes on the floor. I'm sorry I didn't do anything. You were a kid, I said. Kids aren't lifeboats. We found the bench, impossibly ordinary. I ran my palm along the metal, expecting grief to rise like a wave. Instead something steadier came, recognition without collapse, like seeing an old scar and remembering how the skin knit itself. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he'd come back? Milo asked. I considered it, watching a train ease through the station like a thought that has finally formed. I would have gone, I said. I would have believed any promise because I was starving for it. And I would have spent years asking for a kind of love he couldn't give. That might have been a worse vanishing. We sat with that for a while. Then I stood, slung my bag over my shoulder and smiled. Come on. My grandmother burns garlic bread when we're late. As we crossed the floor I turned for a last look. The bench was still there, ready for stories, not endings. The world has a way of shrinking your life to its most dramatic headline. At school, whispers followed me down hallways as faithfully as shadows. In seminars, professors treated me like a case study they were too polite to cite. Some classmates offered me the solemnity people give at funerals. Others radiated curiosity disguised as kindness, questions that dangled like bait. What was it like when? Did you feel? I learned to tighten the knots on my boundaries. I don't talk about that, I'd say when strangers pressed too close. I'm here to study. A radical sentence it turned out. But the old story wasn't finished with me. An op-ed appeared with my name in the 3rd paragraph. Something about how wealth warps accountability and pity loves a pretty setting. The writer didn't know the difference between inheritance and a trust designed to protect a child from her father. They didn't know the difference between a mansion you're grateful for and a sanctuary you never wanted to need. I drafted a response. Then I threw it away. Then I wrote another with less heat and more bones. There are children tonight, I began, who will be told their pain is melodrama, their fear manipulation. They will believe it because the people saying it signed permission slips and cut cake. I didn't name my father. I named patterns. I submitted it and closed my laptop with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The piece didn't change the world. Nothing does by itself. But a girl from Nebraska wrote to say her stepfather called her a liar until the day she left. A boy from Queens said he learned the word grooming from a borrowed library copy of a law review. They had not heard my father's name. They had heard their own. Second Light grew. We partnered with clinics that smelled like bleach and New Hope. We trained volunteers to answer midnight calls with questions that do not blame. We worked with schools to make sure a child's absence triggered a call that asked, "Are you safe?" Before, where were you? I found myself in rooms I used to imagine only belonged to other people, explaining to legislators how identity theft is another kind of abandonment when the thief sleeps down the hall. Some nights I came home to the little apartment off campus and sat on the kitchen floor eating cereal from the box, too tired to find a bowl. Dr. Carter would say that's balance, building a life made of both testimonies and grocery lists. I say it's survival, which is its own art. The last time I saw my father, I did not plan it. Courthouses breed a strange gravity. They pull the same people into the same rooms over and over until you begin to believe history is a hallway you are doomed to walk. I was there to file something simple for Second Light. A permit, a renewal, a fingerprint inked on paper to let me sit with teenagers in lockstep chairs without a guard hovering in the doorway. He was being led down the corridor in a line of men whose faces blurred into one exhausted color. For a breath, time hiccuped. The fluorescent light, the scuffed floor, the clink of metal. He lifted his head. Our eyes met. There was anger there, yes, the ancient kind I knew by heart. But there was also something emptier, a space where excuses had once lived. Neither of us spoke. What would we have said? You taught me the shape of leaving. You taught me the price of staying. He moved past. The chain dipped and rose like the tide. Outside, winter air bit the soft place under my jaw. I stood on the courthouse steps and watched a bus unload women in work coats, men carrying folders under their arms, a kid in a skateboard helmet holding his mother's glove like a talisman. Everyone had a story with its own verdicts and appeals and exhausted miracles. Mine was not the only one that mattered. That truth steadied me more than any sentence ever had. On the walk back to the office we rent above a bakery, the smell of sugar found me before the door did. Inside, the radiator hissed and one of our interns, blue hair, fierce eyes, looked up from a stack of intake forms. "You're back," she said, relief softening her mouth. "We have a message for you. A girl from Tulsa. She watched your video 3 times and wants to know if we can help her grandmother get custody." "We can try," I said, shrugging off my coat. "Put her at the top." I sat at my desk. The window showed a slice of sky bright enough to make me squint. For a moment the station returned, not the sting but the shape. The bench. The clock. The girl counting minutes like beads. I wanted to tell her, "You were never erased. You were waiting for yourself to arrive." I turned to the stack of calls, to the work that knits a future one thread at a time. The radiator ticked. The bakery ovens thundered like a heartbeat below us. I picked up the phone. There are days when memory feels like a storm pressing against the windows. One gust and it all comes rushing back. The silence in his car, the weight of the backpack, the station clock that refused to stop ticking. Even years later, even after verdicts and degrees and newspaper articles that tell me I've overcome, there are mornings I wake with the taste of cold metal in my throat, the echo of that bench imprinted on my skin. Dr. Carter calls it residual grief. Healing isn't about erasing the scar, she reminds me. It's about learning to live with it as part of your map. He's right. I've learned to see the scar not as a disfigurement but as a compass. It points me back to why I get out of bed, why I answer calls from strangers, why I sit with children who whisper through tears that they must be the problem. Because once I was that child. At Second Light, we've grown beyond anything I imagined. What started with a desk in my grandmother's library is now a network of advocates across 5 states. We fund lawyers who refuse to let children be silenced, we run shelters where laughter can bloom again, and we teach teenagers that their names are more than signatures someone else can forge. But impact doesn't erase loneliness. At night, the house my grandmother left me feels too big. I make pasta for one and end up eating cereal instead. The silence can still sting. There are no holidays with parents, no casual phone calls about recipes or lost socks. The family tree behind me is scorched. And yet, when I look at the kids who write letters with crayons or shaky pens, telling me they don't feel invisible anymore, I know that new roots have grown in places I never expected. Some nights I whisper to the girl I once was, "You mattered all along." And maybe, just maybe, I'm beginning to believe it. One autumn afternoon, Milo showed up at my office unannounced. He was taller now, his voice deeper, shoulders broader, but the shadows under his eyes hadn't faded. He leaned against the doorframe with the same hesitance I once carried into every room. "I signed up for community college," he said, almost defensively as if bracing for judgment. "I want to study psychology. Maybe help kids, ones like us." For a second, the years collapsed and he was still the boy scribbling in a diary, trying to survive a house that smelled of cologne and lies. I smiled and pulled him into the room. "That's incredible. You'll be good at it." He shrugged, eyes darting away. "Sometimes I think I don't deserve to. I stayed quiet too long." I shook my head. "Survival is not betrayal. You were a child, Milo. Children shouldn't have to save anyone." We sat in silence, the radiator clicking like punctuation. Then he asked the question that had been gnawing at him. "Do you ever miss him?" The word him hung heavy. I thought of the man in the navy suit, of the smile that belonged to a stranger, of the fists he kept clenched around lies. My chest ached. "I miss the father I thought he was," I admitted. "But that man doesn't exist. And missing a ghost is different than missing a person." Milo nodded, and for the first time his shoulders relaxed. We ordered pizza, ate it straight from the box on my office floor, and talked until the janitor flicked the lights. It wasn't a perfect evening, but it was something real. Two survivors building a language where silence used to be. The first time I spoke to an audience larger than a courtroom, my legs nearly gave out. The auditorium buzzed with hundreds of faces. Students, teachers, parents, waiting for me to turn my pain into something they could carry home. I gripped the podium, nails digging into wood, and tried to breathe. "You don't have to be perfect," Mrs. Turner had told me. "You just have to be true." So I began with the bench. I described the clock, the $20, the way strangers passed by while I begged a father who would never turn back. I watched the faces in front of me shift. Some leaned forward, some wiped tears, some looked away. Then I told them what came after. The forged debts. The betrayal of both parents. The courtroom where lies tried to dress themselves as love. And finally, the truth I had clawed my way toward. That survival is not weakness, that choosing yourself is not selfishness, that no child should carry the blame for an adult's cruelty. When I finished, the silence was thick. Then applause rose like thunder. People stood. Some cried openly. Students rushed to the stage with notebooks to be signed, but more importantly, to tell me fragments of their own stories. A girl whispered that her stepmother told her she was excess baggage. A boy admitted he counted the minutes when his father disappeared on benders. Each voice reminded me that my scar had become a doorway for others. Afterward, I sat backstage shaking, overwhelmed. My grandmother's words echoed. "You don't need everyone to believe you. You just need the right people." That night, I realized the right people weren't just judges or juries. They were the invisible children who finally saw themselves reflected. Years passed and life stretched wider than I expected. Yale led to law school to internships. Internships to long nights under fluorescent lights drafting briefs that smelled of ink and exhaustion. I loved it. Every clause felt like a weapon I could sharpen for someone who needed defending. Second Light flourished alongside my studies. We won cases for children whose voices were buried under guardianship papers. We kept families together when neglect was only a mask for poverty. We taught young survivors to see themselves as more than case numbers. But growth brought its own storms. Tabloids resurfaced my father's name whenever headlines ran dry. Disgraced businessman's daughter founds advocacy group. They printed photos of me at conferences, dissected my clothes, speculated about inheritance. I hated it. I wanted the work to be louder than the shadow of his choices. One night, exhausted, I collapsed onto my couch and stared at the ceiling. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Subject line, "You saved me." It was from a 17-year-old in Kansas. She wrote about being locked out of her house at night, about teachers who didn't believe her, about how she found my speech online and played it every time she thought of giving up. "When you said you wouldn't disappear," she wrote, "I believed maybe I didn't have to either." I cried then, not the hollow sobs of the bench, but the release of knowing that pain had been transformed into a rope strong enough to pull someone else up. The world would always try to reduce me to headlines. But letters like hers reminded me that my story wasn't about erasure anymore. It was about illumination, lighting the path for others in the dark. On the anniversary of that night at the station, Milo and I went back one last time. The air smelled the same, coffee, oil, iron, but I was no longer the girl with a thrift store jacket and $20. I walked in wearing confidence stitched into my posture, law degree in hand, a life rebuilt from ashes. We sat on the same bench. Milo traced the grooves in the metal. Hard to believe this is where it started, he murmured. No, I said softly. This is where it ended. Where he ended. But it's also where I began. I closed my eyes and let the memories come. The glass doors closing, the laughter that wasn't mine, the silence heavier than words. Then I let them go. They didn't own me anymore. We stood and I took one last look at the clock that had once counted my erasure. Now it simply ticked forward, neutral and steady as time always does. As we walked out into the crisp night, I realized the deepest revenge isn't anger or even justice. It's existence. It's standing tall when someone tried to fold you small. It's speaking when they wanted you silent. It's loving yourself enough to never beg for love from those who weaponized it. The girl on the bench is gone. In her place stands a woman who turned betrayal into fuel, who turned scars into maps, who built doors for others out of the same walls that once trapped her. I don't disappear. I never will. And to every child who feels invisible tonight, I whisper across the distance, neither will you.